So it's a pleasure to introduce the last guest of our conference this afternoon, which is Gáspár Miklós Tamás. Gáspár Miklós Tamás is a Hungarian philosopher and dissident essayist. He is born in Transylvania, Romania, from where he was forced to emigrate to Hungary in 1978. And then in Hungary he studied philosophy, among many other things he did there in this time. In the early 1990s he taught at the University of Budapest, ELTE, from where he was fired after having published illegal tracts. He became the leader of the Alliance of the Free Democrats and was as such elected member of the Hungarian parliament in 1919, and as well director of the Institute of Philosophy of the Hungarian Academy of Science in 1991. In both places he only served for a short time, and from the early 90s until recently, Tamás was a visiting professor in many places like New York and Oxford, Paris, Chicago, Berlin. And well, today he is a vocal opponent to the Hungarian state, governed by Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party. His theoretical work draws on the ideas of Italian autonomism, German new Marxism, American political Marxism. And his recent publications are very interesting articles. I only want to cite 4 of them. As Telling the Truth About Class from 2006, Innocent Power from 2012, Post-Fascism and Anti-Communism from 2014, and we have the German the German version right here on the book table, Communism After 1989, published originally in 2015. So, well, his talk is entitled Fascism Without Fascism, and we're glad to hear this talk, and please help me to welcome Gáspár Miklós Tamás.
Well, I shall follow the advice of Chantal Mouffe, and I'll be both agonistic and affectionate. And I will promise also a trade-off. Today, we've been told that we should avoid the word fascism, although, yeah. And so I offer a trade-off. Others won't use the word fascism, and I won't use the word populism, for the very simple reason that I don't think it exists. And now, going back to the fundamental problem here, you see, after whatever has happened in the 1930s and 1940s, including such a small episode as the Second World War, in 1945, there's been established a very fragile consensus. For the first time, there's been an eruption of elements of socialism after the crisis of fascism and of war in the international arena. And there's been this idea established in the UN Charter, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, etc., that has drawn, in a very imperfect and very insincere and hypocritical manner, some of the lessons of, especially of National Socialism. And that, I'll try to tell you what that consensus consisted in. And that consensus is really broken now. It has been broken from '89. Because, you know, what was the fundamental procedure of fascism against bourgeois democracy and especially against socialism? You know, the idea of bourgeois democracy, bourgeois liberalism, and of the nation state based on liberal nationalism of the 19th century type was the following: that the telos of the political development of all those things was to approximate the idea of human rights and civic rights. In other words, to achieve a state of affairs in which nobody, but nobody, will be allowed to be excluded from the political community. To be a member of the political community, the membership of the political community, was the goal of democratic and socialist progress. It was also an aspect of democratic nationalism of the 19th century, which was based on a pact that's very important, especially for us Central Europeans, whence all this hell has broken loose in the 20s and 30s. Namely, that you would be allowed to be a member of the political community if you were prepared to pay the price of admission, which was cultural assimilation. So, nations have been constructed through reunification, like in the case of Germany and Italy, and later Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, etc., etc. And these nationalisms were supra-ethnic nationalisms. They weren't based on race, on tribe, on this and that and the other. If you accepted to speak the national language, as opposed to what Saint-Just called les patois contre-révolutionnaires, the dialects, the counter-revolutionary dialects. If you were supposed to abandon the Languedoc and accepted the Languedoc, etc., then you would be accepted as a member of the national community with a teleology of equality in the political sense, which of course is the basis of classical republicanism. Now, this trend, although never complete and never sincerely meant, because of course all the colonial peoples were excluded from it, and others, still, that was the telos, and this was broken, this development, this planned development, was broken by racism, that, of course, was always the ground for which was, of course, prepared by imperialism, as it's shown even in such conservative works as Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, where really one of the foundations of fascist development is discovered in the colonial worldview, which was not only a political reality, but was also a world. If you study the history of ideas in England, then of course you will know how the colonial ideas, how Darwinism, how social Darwinism, how one strand of socialism and one strand of liberalism coincide with racist exclusion. None other but John Stuart Mill was a racist and a colonialist, founder of modern liberalism. And you see, in spite of all this, it was of course the heir to this emancipation trend was of course the socialist revolution. That was one of the most important conclusions drawn by those who thought that capitalism and bourgeois democracy and bourgeois liberalism weren't to be saved. That was the conclusion, the last sentence of the Communist Manifesto, 1848, no, proletarians of all countries unite. And the consequence of this was drawn only in 1917. Only in 1917, when for a moment the peoples of this world have discovered that they have a common enemy, and that common enemy was capitalism. And that wasn't the other proletarian of another country. It seems elementary, it seems commonplace, it seems banal, but it appears to be, even today, one of the most difficult things to realize or to construct or build up or whatever. It seems extremely difficult. Why does it seem so difficult? Because the essence of capitalism, be it neoliberal, be it 40s social democratic, be it anything like this, is separation and division. How can a system based, after all, on the domination of a minority survive in the teeth of majority resistance? By making part of the majority their allies. And for this, there always been the main tax, of course, religion, nation, race, this, that, and the other. Nevertheless, some conceptual operations were needed. When in the most radical and most historically important form, Adolf Hitler and his ideologues announced that there are some inhabitants of the national territory, legal inhabitants, who all the same will be deprived of their civic rights and will be excluded from national community. He realized and presented by this among whites on the European continent, because that was the sort of the colonials anyway, that it was possible that people already having acquired membership in the political community can be excluded. This was, if you wish, and then you can see this even today in these latest developments or triumphs of the right, be it extreme or whatever, the sort of a liberation. It was the discovery that there was a basis on which oppression and repression and discrimination and violence against others was morally justified. Not all of us were members of the same moral and political community. There were some against whom violence and destructive passions were justified, permitted, and even praiseworthy. Now, look, this is a sort of a liberation. This has freed something, not passion, not passion. Passions are, to speak of political passions, here I agree with Chantal Mouffe, that's an abuse. You cannot tell precisely passion and reason in politics one from another. And our passions that are abstract, what kind of passion is that? But there was a liberation from commands of morality, from the commands of generosity, from commands of self-limitation. And that, of course, has replaced genuine emancipation. It was a radical change of hitherto existing society. And this was, of course, what a very unfashionable thinker today, Herbert Marcuse, called repressive desublimation. Well, look at what happens, for example, with political correctness. So everybody seems and professes to be, for example, in my own country, which was none other but the Prime Minister saying that now the tyranny of political correctness has finally ended and we are free. In parentheses, what kind of man is who needs for his sincerity to be permitted by superior authorities in New York? I mean, very strange. But what is he liberated from under? From hypocrisy. He's liberated from hypocrisy. He's liberated, and now we can say sincerely that the Roma are of inferior quality, that the Hungarian people are working hard and they cannot receive any immigrants and any refugees because they have to pay for the Roma as well who don't want to work. Okay? Okay, that's very simple. He's liberated. He's liberated. But what is liberated there? The faith and the passion in oppression. That's what is liberated. Finally, that has been rehabilitated. You can not only oppress women and ethnic minorities and foreigners and colonials, but you can also talk about it. So it is elevated to the rank of what is spiritual. It is not considered inferior. It's not a dirty secret of a repressive society. It is the openly announced glorious title for dominion. And that is indeed experienced as a liberation. And it is to a certain extent. Yeah, well, the air has been cleared. The air has been cleared. Now we know. Now we know that they want to repress and they want to kill and they want to discriminate and they want to live a passionate life of contempt. Good. So now I will again follow Chantal Mouffe's advice and be agonistic about it, and be agonistic in a very Athenian sense. You know about the Athenian rule that when there was a real strife in Athens, civil war or other kinds, those citizens who won't take sides were exiled or imprisoned. first duty of a democrat is to take sides. This is what I'm proposing to you. And, you know, I was very surprised to hear that somebody said that neoliberalism represented liberty. What? Liberty? The liberty of what? The liberty of whom? We are confronting two versions of the same system, one hypocritical, pretending at equality and pretending at liberty, the other that doesn't. It's a small difference. It's a small difference. What we experience as a victory of the anti-establishment, etc., with the election of Mr. Trump, then you have the most traditional, the most old-fashioned oligarchic government that you can imagine. You know, billionaires and generals. I mean, what's so new about this? This is the absolutely traditional upper class taking power without hypocrisy, without pretending. This is naked power. This is in your face. You are fired. Yes? That's the slogan of the new system. And that's everywhere. And you know, now the power systems have the courage to say, we don't want you. Don't come here. Don't live here. Get out. Get lost. You will be punished. And this is supposed to be progress. Well, to a certain extent it is, because of course it is sincere. It is very sincere. These are the class warriors. These are, to use a traditional old term so dear to me, as an old opponent to Stalinism and post-Stalinism, well, these are the enemies of the people, right? These are the enemies of the people representing small sectional interests and mobilizing people against their own interest by invoking what? By trying to present, partly just in a justified manner, the moral criticism of liberals, half allies of the most repressive capitalism and of social democrats and such. Here I agree with the criticism we heard before. This kind of terror that we've been suffering from, that we were to accept an order of repression and uniformity and exploitation as a system of freedom. Well, that's gone. That's progress, if you wish. We won't call this liberalism, we won't call this democracy. What we'll call it depends on your temperament. One thing won't happen, though. These won't be totalitarian systems. We are not likely to see concentration camps filled with white people. But we already have concentration camps filled with brown-skinned people, called refugee camps. And you see, the question, you know, of an international order has been presented by none other than Immanuel Kant as a question of hospitality. That was considered by him in a famous work, as you all know, especially in this country, you know, I suppose, that hospitality was the condition of a cosmopolitan order by which Kant has understood the international republican order. Republican order in Kant's sense was a federation or a system of states in which all people are full-fledged citizens with all the rights and entitlements and dignities, and that dignity obtains everywhere. The condition is that everywhere there should be a just system. It is unimaginable that a system of exclusions like the present system of nation states and partial federations such as the European Union, which is not a universalist organization, whatever Habermas might think about it, or might have thought about it, he doesn't any longer, but just, you know, that's the, you know, association for rich West European nations. And, but you see, you cannot build up a just and free world out of elements of injustice, inequality, and so on. Now, going even a little deeper, if you allow me, one of the most grievous harms inflicted to the emancipation struggles is our failure to differentiate between two kinds of socialism. One I would call a Rousseauian socialism, and other the Marxian socialism. What has been accepted as a socialist idea almost everywhere has been, of course, Rousseau and not Marx. Marx's day still has to come. It hasn't yet. Rousseau has considered, and his followers, the Jacobins, Social Democrats, and Bolsheviks, they were all followers of Rousseau, that the construction and the construal, both understanding and the construction of an equal, dignified, and just society goes through equality, usually equality obtained through redistribution. But this is not Marx's idea. Marx's idea is not equality. Marx's idea is not redistribution. Marx's idea, an end to the commodity-producing system, an end to alienation, emancipation from the estrangement of the life forces of humankind into the power area of others. That's a theory, a liberationist theory in the sense of autonomy and not in the sense of equality. Equality may be, of course, a consequence. Obviously, just society cannot be unequal, but that's a consequence and not a basis. And when socialists, social democrats and Bolsheviks tried to create a dignified and egalitarian and just society on the basis of redistribution, in the Bolsheviks' case also in a reversal of the value system, because of course it was the Soviet bloc in which for the first time in world history, at the pinnacle of the moral hierarchy, what was put there? Manual labor, physical work. After tens of thousands of years, when it was the spirit, it was, God, priests, sages, philosophers, etc., who were on top, Brahmin, and then, of course, came the aristocracy with a fiery soul, and people who had to work for a living, who had to earn their bread. Even in Athens, they were, of course, not permitted to vote, because nobody who has to work for a living can be independent. Nobody who is laboring for others can be autonomous. No full-fledged member of political community can be at the same time at the service of someone or something else. A real free political community can consist of free people. What does mean a free political community that consists of exploited people who are under the command of the most stringent and brutal set of rules called technology and work discipline and a use of time subordinated to the production of commodities? You enter an office, you enter a shop, you enter a factory, and your autonomy disappears. And this is where you are spending the majority of your waking hours. What kind of a political community of free citizens can this be? This is obviously an illusion. And it has been proven many times to be an illusion. And of course, the discontent, the humiliation that Bifo has spoken about this morning so eloquently and so poetically. Well, humiliation of blacks, humiliation of whites, humiliation of the poor, and even humiliation of not so poor people by being dependent, by even my intellectual colleagues, writing these submissions for grants, everybody collecting their points, everybody trying to have good marks on exams, not one single moment of independence. Is this a free society? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Well, let's stop pretending. Okay, we are being told, end hypocrisy. Very good, end hypocrisy. So when people, of course, say that, our free community is threatened by this and that. Of course people counter, is this a free community? Of course they say, should we defend your system? Why are people so neutral about the conquest of power by these really scheußlich, right-wing governments, such as my own? Because when the liberals will tell them, up in arms, save liberal democracy, save market capitalism, save inequality from the incursions of, all sorts of unpleasant people, and people say, oh, well, yeah, right, yes, should we? Should we save a system that doesn't give us anything very nice, except cheap merchandise in Christmas time? Just go out and see, yeah, nice Kuchen, yeah. And, so people went. So people went. We all had voters of Trump and people who hate Trump are, agree on one point. This world as it is now is not worth saving. This is why the right is winning. This is why the right is winning. And they're right, yes. I mean, what's the great difference? That they are sincere, a bit more oppressive than the rest. They are not so well-mannered. Who cares about manners? Well, I do, but I'm old-fashioned. But yeah, but you see, but even I don't think that this is very essential and very important, very substantive. So you see, I agree too with people who extol the virtues of non-existent political doctrines and practices. I agree that the contempt for the Trump voter and for the Brexiteer is not justified. It's not justified. It is, we have come to a point where we don't resist any longer because we don't think it's worth it. And hence come ideologies in the newspapers that say there's no difference between left and right. Is it not? Is there not? I mean, hierarchy and equality are the same. Yes? Gain for others and suffering for these, and the resistance, even foolish resistance against this, are these really the same? I mean, let's be serious. Let's be serious. Of course, it doesn't seem to be important, however real. Doesn't seem to be important because of the betrayals, because of hypocrisy, and because of what is the main fact of our age, which is the final defeat of the international workers' movement. This is what has changed. This is why there is no alternative. We have lived in a world for a very long time where there was an alternative, not only the philosophy books, but you could go on the street of many towns and then you came across a building on which it was written Arbeiterheim. Yeah? Karl Marx Hof. You could see which were the Kneipen in which your sort of people congregated. You could be sure that those people working in the big factories were against it all. And that there was an idea, it was working class was the first subaltern class in history that had not only a folklore of complaint, but also had a high culture. It had genuine literature, genuine philosophy, genuine social science. It was similar to the ruling classes of the past in having conquered discourse, thought, rational procedures, and was immoderately proud of it, and yes, committed the mistakes of positivism and scientism and other sins of this nature. And that doesn't exist any longer. There's not a double system as it was under the Cold War. Whatever the Soviet Union and the Chinese People's Republic was worth, and I was always their enemy, it was certainly another world. It has preserved the presence of an alternative, symbolically at least for many, and we live in a world in which alternatives are not clear, are not visible, and are not represented. But do we reconstruct such alternative worlds, such agonistic worlds, by decrying difference, political and philosophical and moral difference. Yes, it's very unpleasant, because if you conduct a moral debate, sooner or later you will say of somebody that he's a bad man. Yeah, it may happen. It may happen. That's not, of course, the aim of a moral discussion. That's not the aim of a moral debate. But, of course, judgments of this kind have a weight. And it's inconceivable that an agon, that a real difference in a political community can be free of condemnation, of judgment, which are the consequences of moral choices. When poor old Elfriede Jelinek said that you shouldn't talk to FPÖ voters, well, yes, that's very clumsy. But by this, she doesn't mean that FPÖ voters are not human beings. She has been writing all her life about types that are, typical FPÖ voters. But because she seems to think that it's intolerable to pretend that we share the same moral world with those people who are advocating discrimination and distinction and hierarchy and repression. It is difficult. You can, of course, have a conversation, as I do. I have different temperament. So I would talk to conservatives and to extreme right people and so on and so forth, but there's a limit. And it's always the same. It's always the same, and I guess that you may have had similar conversations. I'm always told, what you want, equal dignity for everybody, universal membership of the political community, end to our nation. These are beautiful dreams. We are representing reality. And reality is discrimination. Reality is putting up boundaries, putting up frontiers, and put the people we don't like beyond those frontiers. And this is not the enmity of people thinking differently within the political community. This is establishing a boundary between political community and between an area where there's no politics, because there are no true human beings. Politics is for us, whoever those us may be, and we can deliberate, we can decide, we can dominate, or we can not dominate, we can equal, we can unequal, but those are outside, and those may be human beings, but certainly are not our fellow citizens. But in what sense, since we are not members of the animal kingdom, what other sense is in the constitution of a human being that is devoid of a political dimension? That we are biologically members of the same race, that's true. But what does it mean? But what does it mean for thinking and feeling beings? Those people will be the members of the same humanity if we are members of the same political community. And in order to be the members of the same political community, to have a say in our lives, in our fates, etc., we'll have to abandon all of our existent institutions. They have proven in the last 500 years that their last result is always a massacre. It has been always like this until now. Look at colonial conquest, look at the great revolutions, look at the great wars, including wars of liberation. Massacre after massacre. Oppression, violence, rape, torture, all this. Well, enough. So, why not emancipation? Why not liberation? Why should we pretend to imitate our enemies, imitate their cunning, imitate their energy, imitate their dynamism? I don't envy them their dynamism, because it comes from the energy of raising above others. This is the energy of distinction. All societies are based on distinction. Read Bourdieu. All societies are based on distinction. All competitiveness, including the most virtuous one, being better at something, being excellent, being the first, being the most intelligent, being the most beautiful, being the fastest. Those are based on distinction, meaning I'm better than you are. And until the basis of that, until our concept of liberty is essentially competitive, it's modeled on the bloody market, right? And not only the market, sports, contests, all our ideas of excellence are differential and hierarchical. You know, Alasdair MacIntyre, somebody remembers Alasdair MacIntyre, in his famous book on virtue, said that our mistake of moderns was, of course, the temptation of equality, because Aristotle still, and St. Thomas Aquinas and the others, according to him, better than us, they knew that the only virtue could be differential virtue. Somebody is better than others. And this is the aim. To be better and better means comparison and contest, but comparison and contest for the losers is humiliation. Not everybody triumphs. It's a very nice idea to have a contest. We have this fuzzy fantasy that we are running, all of us, in the same direction, and somehow we will all be winners. But nobody will run in a contest if nobody will lose. There are no winners without losers. So all these moral and political ideas are wrong if you want to be emancipated, if you want to be disalienated. And so you see, it may be, of course, I'm talking in an essay that some of you may have read. It was published in 2000, 16 years ago. It's called Post-Fascism. Has been more recently republished by Open Democracy. That was published, and all other things as well in this area. But I wanted originally to talk about those matters. But hearing what has been said here today, I decided to change my tack and to try to deliver a sermon to you, right? A sermon to you, a heilige Lektion. And I hope that, because you can see my feelings, you can feel my feelings and my passion, and maybe I can convince you, if not of anything else, but of my deep need to persuade you that you should not go on tolerating all of this. Thank you.
So,
Okay.
Thank you for this passionate reminding of Marxist principles, of the principle of the Marxism, which still is to come, and of this kind of introduction into a discussion, diverse discussion, antagonist discussion. We will will continue later on as well. But, well, first of all, I'd like to ask you if you have any questions to the last talk of
or disagreements or criticisms.
Or, yeah, this is also allowed. Yeah, yes, please, here in the second round.
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's really to go back to your opening statement, whereby you said that you don't believe in populism.
Not really.
I just wanted to understand what you understood precisely by populism, and therefore why you don't understand that there could be a left-wing. That was obviously a counter to Chantal Mouffe's promise of the left-wing populism. I just wanted you to clarify your resistance to the term.
There's nothing to clarify, but I'll try. The thing is that populism, of course, is an idea, and as such it exists. But real populist practices, very well it exists, but it's very, very sparse. very few cases, and some things named populism aren't. So what I meant by this very short sentence was that as an explanation of contemporary political phenomena is unsatisfactory, I think. Maybe wrong, of course. And you see, because populism, in the sense that has been defined by a book I also like very much, by Ernesto Laclau, on the populist mind. This was very successfully illustrated. I don't find those movements. I don't find those movements. I may have quarrels with them if they really appeared. I don't find them. Most certainly, I don't think that people like Trump or Boris Johnson or the next president of the French Republic, François Fillon, or these people, are really populist even in the largest sense of the word, or their movements. Because you see, they're anti-elitists in the very specific technical sense of opposing what today in the American press is called elite, i.e. the East Coast progressive intelligentsia and the part of the bourgeoisie that's sympathetic to it. Well, that's not the ruling class. Populism always had a democratic energy when it existed, and of course it did. And it was also, of course, indeed, on the side of the majority, of the working majority, and so contributed to create this sort of plebeian community where, the weight was on the plebeian popular classes. What are these movements? What are these movements? These movements are, in the service of, of the upper class, of a certain of a fraction of the upper class, etc., etc. And yes, indeed, Syriza and Podemos were genuine populist forces, but I can't see any right populists. They existed before, and even people, I'm very, very sorry that Bifo has left, because you see, Mussolini, while building his movement, as we know him, he was at the same time a free trader, a balancer of budgets, a perfect neoliberal, and didn't find anything difficult about this. And of course, he was mobilizing many people, and some because he was a nationalist, or an imperialist more precisely. So I don't think it explains things well enough. Of course, I said, of course, that was an ironic exaggeration that doesn't exist. I mean, there's no real decisive experience of it. And how should we define these new movements? I call them post-fascist. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not elegant enough. That was 16 years ago, don't forget, in the time of the Schüsselheider government. And I simply meant by this, apart from this citizenship thing, movements that had a lot in common with fascist movements of the past, but they were certainly not totalitarian, certainly not exterministic, and who could find a compromise with electoral systems of the present and so on and so forth. So, of course, they are not, marching on. They don't need to. They don't need to. So, you see, so the name is not so important. But we shouldn't have illusions. These successes of the right that we are witnessing, whatever label we put on these people, are increasing repression and exclusion and discrimination. That's for sure. And because I am not an enemy of populism if it exists, it would be very, very wise if we reserve that term from something else. But this is finally a problem of terminology, and as such, not so important. It's just words. Mm-hmm. Just words,
Well, it might be perhaps the idea of a populism to come, like your idea of Marxism to come, when the people are not represented anymore by institutional politics.
But they weren't. But they weren't even before.
Yeah, of course. But well, that might be the idea of the hope of some of the expression coming from the people without being guided by the so-called populist,
or by whatever. Yes. So I mean, I may, if I were a citizen of Spain or Greece, I would have voted for Syriza or for Podemos. And of course, and I would have then suffered the same defeat. Because let's don't forget that these people have been heavily defeated.
Well, I have been...
Sorry?
I take this for a well, we'll continue with in the order of with the next question, please. No?
Thank you very much. I appreciated your talk. I have one question. You say we are, basically not free as long as we are in the labor market, and I agree with that. The problem is it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? We have to work in order to pay for food, in order to survive. So where do we start? What's the starting point? For I'd say left-wing people like us.
Well, of course, you cannot escape the rules of this society as long as you live in it. That's not, unfortunately, the point. Escaping, the individual exits are, for most people, impossible. Also, they won't lead to liberation. But you see, if you just consider such a very elementary thing as, in the contemporary world, a minority of people working long hours, very frustrating and boring hours usually, and then billions of people who cannot find work, then you might think that technology should be changed and work also divided more equally among people, giving people more time for themselves, also saving people from starving. Such elementary and banal and obvious methods of reformist methods of changing the human condition at least a bit, even that are not being contemplated. There are no political forces really contemplating changes in technology, changes in habitat. Of course, there are a few utopians and dreamers, but in matters of practical politics, nothing is happening because nobody can force the capitalist enterprises to experiment with such menschenfreundlich methods, because that would reduce some of their profits. And you see, leisure has always been associated and identified with freedom. Work was always considered a part of the servile condition. And that may have been an exaggeration of ancient societies that were, of course, very contemptuous of the lower classes. Nevertheless, there is some truth in that. And easing the burden of servitude, of this most obvious servitude, would be a great alleviation of people's physical, psychological, and moral pains. And that, for example, would have been a worthy goal of many people, and also saving huge populations in the third world and other such places that seem to be extraneous and superfluous to the contemporary capitalist economy. And you see, Karl Polanyi has said in the 1930s that it's a simplification what he said, but one must think about it. He said that what was the difference, he asked himself and his readers, between fascism and communism. He said, and that's very, very important, that fascism on the whole tried to generalize the economy to the detriment of politics, and all the political independence and independent action of the political community has been liquidated, and the crude rules of capitalist economy were considered to be supreme, and communism was exactly the opposite. It was the extension of politics to all realms, including that of economy. And that, of course, is a simplification, but not a bad simplification. And, what we can see, however we rechristen the forces that are now successful, we see the increase of the power of the economy, as it were, of capitalist economy, and less defense for the citizens, and thereby, of course, the whole phenomenon of neoliberalism is being continued. Of course, it has started neoliberal globalization, deregulation, and so on and so forth, where the instruments in the hands of the political community has been ever fewer and fewer. And this goes on, and this goes on, and I can't see any changes in this trend.
Okay, are there more comments or questions about this proposition? When capitalistic invasion means that you don't live without any idea, you should begin to express ideas by naming the thing. So I have two questions right now. So before first I take this one.
Yes.
I just want to say just a short comment. I think if left and populism would have able to come together, it would have happened in U.S. election, because, of course, again, it is another debate how left Hillary was, but from but applying relativity theory, from looking from the Trump's perspective, yes, Hillary was kind of leftist. She was putting in her discourse a little bit feminism here, you know, with a source of feminism, and a little bit like anti-racist discourse or whatever. But eventually, she lost the election. And that's why I think this also shows that how this populist left and populist rhetoric is somewhat incompatible in a sense to convince the larger population by just putting those kind of like fragmentations there. But I just lost my track because I just wanted to say something else actually about this. Because I think what was ignored in Hillary's election process was that the failed populism that ignored Black Lives Matter movement and ignored and suppressed Bernie supporters, particularly, they totally eliminated them from the election process.
I know. Yeah.
And so by doing this, actually, they were going against populism, because what is more populist in the sense than Black Lives Matter movement was in the US? I mean, what was the problem embracing this movement and engaging, integrating in Hillary's, but the system didn't make it possible for Hillary and for Hillary's white feminism, also for Hillary's certain kind of like moderate leftist discourse to integrate, for instance, Black Lives Matters movement as well as Bernie Sanders supporters, because it was not possible, because this populism doesn't allow it. This is what I'm trying to say. So what I'm supposed to do now, then I'm going to go to Trump's populist discourse and try to reappropriate his kind of like populist
that has
discourse.
Not been proposed.
This is not going to, this is not the populism that I want to be engaged. That's why I think we need to first look at our populism inside what's happening, like what says, for instance, Black Lives Matter movement. What was the demand from Bernie supporters that eventually neither Black Lives Matter movement nor Bernie supporters went to vote. They didn't go to vote. So this was also
Many
created.
didn't, yeah.
Mostly.
I wouldn't have either. I wouldn't have voted.
This is exactly, yeah.
I couldn't. Maybe I should have, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. But thank God I'm not, in this sense, I'm not an American citizen.
Well, it's funny you said that. I didn't vote either. And I was about to ask a similar question about Hillary and Bernie, which is, I'm very critical of the idea that Bernie was a legitimate alternative. I mean, I think he played the role of satisfying a small contingent that refused to vote for Hillary, but at the same time, the question I was originally going to pose to you is maybe a tactical one, which is, even if you take, for example, that Bernie was a viable populist candidate, in the conversations I had with two camps of Hillary supporters, one of which was completely bought the propaganda hook, line, and sinker and thought she was a great leader, completely, aligned with that thought. But the other half was a pragmatic take, which is, of course, we understand the neoliberal regime, we understand these politics, we understand that this is a sham candidate, but at the same time, it became a moral, ethical dimension entered into it, which was, this is still, we have to do this. How can we condemn our neighbors to something even marginally worse, under Trump? And so therefore, we're somehow forced by this moral obligation and this pragmatic decision to cast our vote for Hillary. So my question isn't legitimating that, but how do you combat that moral, pragmatic stance in the sort of center-left?
Right, well, I'm not in the center-left, but yes, but it's a problem for all of us. One thing is, of course, from case to case. You must, ponder the amount of danger and such like. But there are moments when there's no choice. And this was maybe one of those moments. It's debatable. But you see, it seemed to me that both are worse. And that really voting for this obvious failure and obvious hypocrisy and so on and so forth, that would do a lot of harm to the future. So just imagine what would have happened now if Hillary just went in with a few votes majority. Total stationary, decadent, impotent power of what has been seen before. It could have been, from the point of view of the present, but of the future, it could have been a greater threat than Trump's presidency. I'm pained to say that. But this at least might, it's not sure that it will, but it might elicit the right kind of opposition that will address class as well as race and gender and region and age and health and so on and so forth. There's a hope of that. So, in that respect, maybe it's not the great disaster which it otherwise, of course, is. Sorry, it's not a very, majestic response, but that's what I'm capable of.
Yeah, we have another occasion because we have another question in the rear of the room.
Me again. So do you, to a certain extent, agree with Zizek, who says that there might actually, come something good out of this because the left finally has to sit down and, get together and form an opposition that's powerful enough to actually counteract this very populist and very conservative movement?
Yes, well, you'll see that I have a little pragmatic in me. I wouldn't have said that before the elections. All right.
Yeah. This is the difference between you and Zizek.
Right. Yes.
Is there... one more question here in the front.
Thanks. Do you think, is there a way around, like us now, I say, as people in the Western society, have to grow to, I think we have to grow to a point where we are willing to lose privileges or let go of possible privileges which politicians are trying to catch us with in order to have a change to any better. I don't know what that is, but I think somehow we have to, in the inner sense, let go of this thinking to kind of sustain, a privileged situation?
Well, if I don't want to exaggerate in the direction of sermonizing, then, well, you know, if the problem is put in this way, that you must choose between relinquishing some of the privileges or not, isn't a slightly better question, I'm saying that because I can't answer yours, isn't that a slightly better question to say that privileges are unjust? And that is not a question of our will of relinquishing privileges, which of course is uncomfortable and painful maybe, but it's thinking about how can you share the advantage, because you know you can destroy privileges without advantaging anybody. We've seen that in the Soviet-type societies, where many privileges have been destroyed indeed, without making a wealthier and happier society. So if indeed a method can be found in which the sacrifice of the middle classes and of the bourgeoisie, etc., if such a thing is forthcoming ever, would make sense in economic and social sense, then the question is, yes, well, yes, since privileges are privileges, hence unjust, our problem is how to share and how to redistribute and how to make them work for the advantage of others. And yes, I think that privileges should not exist, and we should live in equal societies, and ultimately world society should be equal. But of course, that's just a slogan. I know very well, because that's not so easy to distribute goods and values and whatever between existing very different societies and different cultures and so on and so forth. And we don't have a world government. And we probably shouldn't either have a world government. So that's a very difficult thing to think. But probably differences between differential development of various regions can be gradually healed. This is a wound. Can be gradually healed, but for this we need indeed a changed world. And because otherwise what we end up with is only charity and only benevolent work and consolation for the victims, and that's too little.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some more, a little more question. Well, I take a last question, please. No? Here in the first row. No.
Just a question, since you said you wrote about post-fascist world, and we're talking about the potential for new fascism, and Susanna Pfeffer began with this word that stuck in my head about the angst of the first fascism in Germany, and then this idea of impotence from Bifo's talk, or impotent rage, and this kind of instrumentalized anxiety, which was one of the terms from Umberto Eco. So are we also in a new era of anxiety, or post-fascist anxiety, or?
Well, look, I mean, anxiety, of course, is a subjective thing, but there are reasons for fear. You know, when you live in a country, as many of us do, where some minorities are openly threatened, others are threatened in a veiled way, others are only dehumanized rhetorically by the media and by political discourse. When you see the rebirth of pre-war anti-Semitism, when you see monuments to erstwhile Nazis erected all over the place, there is in Hungary a fellow Transylvanian of mine. He was a Nazi writer, quite insignificant, but a popular writer. And he is the only writer to have more than 400 statues in the country. It's a small country. 400 statues. While the national classics have at most a few dozen. Why does this absolutely mediocre, insignificant, slightly entertaining writer have more than 400 statues? Who are erecting these statues? Of course, it's the extreme right organizations, including some churches, including some local government and so on. This is the most celebrated figure of the Hungarian culture. It's not Polanyi, it is not Lukács, it is not Adi, it is not Bartók. No, it is this, called Vas anyway. You don't have to know. And of course, and you go through your cities, and you look at all these symbols, and of course, some people are anxious as a result, because of course, this is of course a statement that we will erect statues to Nazis. Do you understand? This is a gesture. This is not only just celebrating the past. This is also erecting a present. Okay, they won't win. I don't think that they will erect a Nazi society. There's no chance of that. Nevertheless, the threats are there, and especially as regards the Roman. And when we saw in the whole of East Central Europe this mobilization against the refugees, where in some countries are 86% against one single refugee, the idea of zero immigration has a majority support in most East Central European countries. Interestingly, not in the Balkan countries, and so on. Of course, these are reasons for alarm and reasons for apprehension, obviously. But of course, that's not good politics. Obviously, that's not good politics. And no recipe has been found. No recipe has been found. And you could see how the number of those people opposed to this xenophobic propaganda that went on everywhere, filling everything, drawing out the sound of everything else and of everybody else. So you could see that people, former friends of mine, etc., important intellectuals, trying to toe the line of the government, not because of pecuniary prizes or of fear, but because of conformism, because of simple conformism, because of the desire to belong to a very highly motivated society. Yes, but that, of course, these apprehensions can lead people to not recognize properly the real dangers and real political threats, and indeed identify the politics of today with the politics of the 1930s. That would be really a great mistake, because they are not identical at all. These states don't have the dynamism, the energy, the paganism, the iconoclasm, the boldness of classical fascism. Classical fascism was something. It's our enemy and we hate it, but at the same time you have to recognize that it was not something humdrum and insignificant. Well, these are humdrum and insignificant. So that's not it. And we shouldn't exaggerate in this direction either.
Okay, so I think we all would be grateful for a little break. And you will see all of our guests together in the scene right after the break. So we see each other like in 25 minutes, 5:05 p.m. And well, I don't want to end this session without saying thank you very much.